Technical problem on my part here, so I'm hopefully getting this mostly resolved here today. Sorry about the lateness. I figured we probably lost a few people with getting a late start like this. We were trying something different, and I know we're soon going to be in a new studio where it'll be a little bit easier and probably a little bit more efficient than what you see right now. But essentially, this is our third live stream that we've done so far at We the Governed here, third in a row on through 3 weeks, and the third live stream in a row. So this, I hope, is going to be a useful format to communicate. Of course, it helps if on my side there's more technical proficiency with how I get it going. So I'm sorry for those of you who missed it. So yes, you can hear me now. And what I'll try to do is, if you can, in the past, we've usually had so many questions coming in. This isn't Ask Me Anything live stream. So if you can say at We the Governed, it'll just be easier for me to spot the questions, usually in the comment field to the side. So I do apologize for the delay and for the technical difficulties we had in the beginning. Just a real quick wrap up today. I was able to finish filming a couple videos that we'll be launching over the next couple days this week, and so I really would like it if I get some feedback on those videos. Let me know the topics that you like or you don't like, and also for those of you who prefer to engage more on a personal basis. I get questions oftentimes, where are you going to be speaking at? And I had a list here just in case anybody's going to some of these events. I know I'm going to be the MC at the Pierce County Lincoln Day Dinner, which is coming up on the 20th. On the 21st, I'll be at the Bainbridge Island Women's Republican Club as the main speaker there. I believe I'm going to Walla Walla to speak. I think that's the Republican Club out there later on the week. I'm going to be at the Kitsap Lincoln Day Dinner as well. And unfortunately, I can't be at the Thurston County Lincoln Day Dinner because you guys scheduled them right on top at the same time, actually. I'm also speaking at the Skagit County Lincoln Day Dinner, which means I can't go to the San Juan County Lincoln Day Dinner, which I would love to be at otherwise. Friends everywhere, just can't always be in two places at once. So I look forward to seeing you there. If you're at one of those events or you were considering going to one of those events and you want to talk to me personally, I'd love to see you there. I do a lot of these events and also activist training around the state that I travel around for. So if you have a group of activists where you live locally, reach out to me, and if we can get on the calendar anywhere in Washington State. If it's outside of the state, it's a little bit hard for me to schedule, but if you're in Washington State, I'm happy to come out and help any way I can, teach you how to use the Public Records Act or how to file Public Disclosure Commission complaints. Anyway, there's a number of different things that people usually ask me to do for activist training. And I've done a few of these in the past, and we can always modify them to the needs that you have here locally. Let me just point out, there are a couple things I was going to mention. This is filing week, which means that for a lot of local offices, if you're running for school board or city council or fire commissioner or any of these other local offices, this is the week that you have to file with the auditor's office. If you don't file by Friday, you're not going to be on the ballot, and you can't run for office. So that's just a quick reminder. I know I have done some videos recently where I've talked about, if you're not really prepared, please don't run for governor. But if you're new to politics and you want to get involved, those local government offices are a great place to start. I was on a school board for about 5 years. Great experience. It's really good for anybody who wants to make an impact. So I think that these, as an option, I think that that's something just to consider. I have a number of different questions here that came up here all at once. What do you think? Say you're asking me about what are you thinking about? This is from Doug. What do you think about somebody running for governor? Gonna have to be a little more specific than that. I've done a couple videos on the governor's race, which you can see on my channel. Actually, if you go to the We the Govern channel, you'll see a couple of them. And I'm doing another one that has more to do about the fight between Franz and Ferguson that's going on right now. But between those videos, I probably expressed myself fairly clearly as to what I think. But there's still a long ways to go. So we got a lot of other issues that are worth considering there. There was somebody here, Jeremy, you asked a question, you mentioned what we really need to know is who the heck are we putting in the race that's worth a darn, let's just say that. And that's true. I mean, the quality of the candidate makes a big difference. It's not the only thing, but it is an issue to consider. Milo Henderson, there's a question. Glenn, is there any update on SB 5163, releasing of sexual violent predators in the so-called less restrictive alternatives? And what you're referring to there is actually SB 5163, which, by the way, they keep these, you almost have to attach the year that bill is attached to, which is a couple of years ago now. I've written some articles about that. This had to do with taking the McNeil Island most violent sex predators in state history and then releasing them into neighborhoods very quietly, actually finding homes that they can kind of secretly put these guys in. And then you'll get notified after they've been there, but they're running these homes with these nonprofit organizations that are making an incredible amount of money that they get paid by the state to keep them there. And so that's going to be, it's going to be an ongoing problem because they're doing a lot of sneaky things there, I think, with DSHS, and they're trying to recategorize violent sex predators. They'll try to change their category so they're not technically a violent level 3 sex predator. They'll try to basically recategorize them and say they're a level 2 sex predator, even regardless of what their actual background is. And so they're doing a lot of real sneaky things to release some of the worst people that they have in prison and put them back out into society. The one thing I do want to point out is that up until 1990, these people were released into society without any notice of any kind at all. In fact, nobody knew who they were or where they went. So Washington State was the first state to ever to pass the Community Protection Act in 1990. Which many states have imitated since then, which required registering sex offenders. But this is something, just because we shut down the Tenino facility, which was near me, it's still an ongoing policy fiasco and a squandering of resources and a completely ridiculous impact to public safety in our communities that's explicitly and specifically encouraged and promoted by Governor Inslee and Bob Ferguson and the whole DSHS bureaucracy. There's employees who work there that know it's crazy and they don't want it to happen, but they're being overruled by this push, and it's a disaster right now. So that is an issue. Milo, you asked that question. That's an issue we have to pay attention to. It's not going away anytime soon. We do have to make some policy fixes to kind of close that door again and stop going down this insane road. And it's just going to take a lot of work. Jason, you asked a question here about the gun ban case was moved out of Eastern Washington and moved to Thurston County. Is there any chance of getting an impartial trial? In Thurston County, no. And I actually think the case you're talking about, so there's several lawsuits that have been filed against the gun ban, various versions of the gun ban. There are actually 3 bills that came through the state legislature this cycle. And they're all unconstitutional in their own way. And if you read some of the public records request data that we got back from the AG's office, the stuff they didn't conceal or hide, which appears to be something that the AG's office does on a regular basis, but the stuff they didn't hide, the stuff we actually got from them, clearly indicates that there's a lot of outside these groups that Nick Hanauer and George Soros and Bloomberg fund that are just hate the ability of you to have firearms to defend yourself. They've had a kind of a legal strategy. So rather than lump it all into one bill and get the whole thing thrown out, they spread it over a couple of bills, figuring that if they lost the constitutional arguments on several of them, they could still get something passed at the end of the day that would stick. Every attorney is fully aware in this process, even the incompetent ones that work at the AG's office, they're fully aware that it's unconstitutional. They know it is. They just don't care. They figure that we've got enough corrupt judges around that they'll roll the dice and they can probably get one of the corrupt judges to support the idea, which is terrible, but that's how they've done it. So going back to this lawsuit, the serious lawsuits are in federal court. The unserious ones, in my opinion, are the ones that are typically, it's not that they're unserious, but their likelihood of success, judging from the horrible decisions that have come out of our state Supreme Court and the appellate court levels, and some of the local Thurston County Superior Court is very, very tough. You're not going to get an impartial trial. And the problem is, it's not a jury. If you're able to go to a jury trial, you've got a decent chance in Thurston County, probably 50-50. But you're probably going to end up with a judge making the rulings. I don't know the legal strategy exactly in that particular lawsuit that you're talking about there, but I do know the judges in Thurston County, and regardless of partisan affiliation, which is they're all Democrats, of course, but that's not the issue. The issue is that they are 100% focused on supporting the state in almost every decision that comes before them. So they'll never question the state. They always give the state the benefit of the doubt. In a case like this in particular, they seem to support the state when it comes to taking away your freedoms and your rights. So that's a real issue. And I wouldn't count. I'd be very leery of having a case in Thurston Superior Court and expect to get a fair hearing with the judges there. Here, where I live in Thurston County. Why can't Eastern Washington be its own state? Well, there's just a whole process you have to go through to get it done. And in the same way that Chaz Chop couldn't be its own state when they tried to take over and secede from America in Seattle in 2020, Eastern Washington can't just magically suddenly decide it wants to be its own state. There's actually a legal process you go through. There's actually a ton of writing that's been done about this because this has been thematically something that pops up periodically. And I think it's less about Eastern Washington than it is about rural America wanting to break away from the crazies in the cities who get enough people to vote for them in their machines that they kind of take over the lawmaking for rural areas where culturally it's just very, very different. And so I think that mainly the challenge there is all the steps that you have to go through. I mean, essentially, you have to get the people who don't want you to break away. One thing to remember is that this is almost always a story of more conservative people trying to break away from socialist sort of policies or politicians. And socialists can't allow any place to exist out there that has the ability to demonstrate that freedom and liberty is a superior organizing principle for a community. It's why the people who are moving away to Texas or Nebraska or Idaho are doomed because the leftists can't let them survive. They have to follow and take down or bring you down to their level. And so they're just going to constantly be coming after you wherever you go, which is why you have to just defeat them where they are. There's no other option. The other question, why can't Eastern Washington be its own state? I mean, technically it could. You'd have to go through a bunch of these steps. It's not that easy. And the truth is, if there was really a clear path where you could just become your own state, what would probably happen is rural Eastern Oregon, rural Washington, including rural counties on the west side of Washington, would all want to be together. What we'd really want to do is just abandon Seattle and Portland. And so that's really the issue. And it just takes a lot of work. Let's see, there's somebody saying that the American flag flown over the upside down. I don't know what you're talking about there exactly. Let's see, it's getting organized is a good idea. This is, yeah, jury, no jury. Jennifer, you had a comment here about jury or no jury, SOL. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've been in a lot of lawsuits. I've been sued a lot, and I filed my fair share back. I don't believe in playing defense there, and although you have to at times. And the biggest problem with litigation is I think a lot of people who are not attorneys, for some reason, have the sense that you can go and have a lawsuit and solve all the world's problems. And I don't know if it's like a Perry Mason episode from Sunday Afternoon Special where you get a 2-hour episode and solve the world's problems. It's just not how it works. Even good attorneys oftentimes fail. And the truth is most attorneys aren't that good. And most attorneys, even if they are good, if you bring them outside of their specialty and you put them into a different type of legal situation, they're going to fail. I mean, try to put it in the sense of like a doctor that specializes in orthopedic surgery, and then you try to have them do brain surgery, they're going to fail. And attorneys are basically the same way, just not that smart. And they're very good at selling themselves usually. So an attorney's not going to tell you that they're incompetent at the type of law that you're asking them to practice for you, if they're desperately in need for a paycheck that month. And so unfortunately, that's the kind of problem that you end up running into with litigation. So you have to be really selective who your attorneys are and the type of lawsuit that you're filing, which courts you're going to go in, federal, state, when it comes to gun rights. I would stick to the feds because the federal decisions and the trend in federal gun rights as far as how they're hearing these cases are really good. This is despite the fact that Washington State's Constitution is actually better at the way it's written if they understood plain English and the meaning of the English language. The Washington State Constitution is actually better than the federal Constitution when it comes to how it protects gun rights, but we really have some issues. So there's a question of, can we secede? No, that doesn't work too well. That's not really the option. That ended back in the 1860s. Probably not going to come up again. Let's see. There's a question, Doug, you asked about Highway 12, not 4 lanes, only I-90s, the major freeway. I'm going to tell you one thing about that. I'm not intimately familiar with all the details of the Department of Transportation, but if you go to the top of White Pass, which is ultimately where Highway 12 crosses over the Cascade Highway, the reason why just look at some of those abysses, and how you really have to do some major engineering up there to take that pass and to make it 4 lanes, particularly with the rock slides that they have at the top of the pass, especially as you're coming down the east side. I almost got hit by a little rock. It wasn't a big rock slide, but it was a little rock slide last summer. So it's just a very Highway 12 is going to take a lot of work, a lot of engineering to make it wider. It'd be nice if one of the other passes had about the equivalent of I-90 capacity going east, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. It took us long enough to get I-90 to with the improvements that they've made there recently. Jason, you had a question of, has there been any consequences for the Chaz Chop fiasco besides writing big checks? Yeah, no kidding. Anybody that's been tracking this, I mean, there's been multiple lawsuits that were filed both by businesses and that were impacted by the Chaz Chop disaster. And for those of you who don't know, Chaz Chop, various names, Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, and then they decided that name wasn't cool enough. And so anyway, they Capitol Hill, anyway, they keep changing the names. And this is when a bunch of Antifa BLM people in the 2020 decided to take over a bunch of blocks. I actually did visit Chaz Chop myself. I went up there in the morning because at the time, I think my son was 15 years old and he really, really wanted to go visit Chaz Chop. And so I told him I would take him there so he could see this unfolding fiasco in real time. But I didn't want to go there in the evening when it was getting pretty dangerous. So we went there in the morning when I figured most of them were either coming off of their meth hit from the night before, or they were recovering from all the alcohol they drank, or whatever drugs they were using. And so that was actually a pretty good move, going in there in the morning. And we apparently weren't wearing the right color bandanas, because I'm pretty well known, and I didn't want to be I just didn't want to be completely gang attacked by a gang there. And it was pretty chaotic. But it was good to go there and see it. Anyway, it was just chaos. It's hard to imagine that's in America, but it was. And it's just the kind of thing that I think that shouldn't be forgotten. And unfortunately, the consequences that you're talking about here, Jason, for the Chaz Chop fiasco, all those consequences are ultimately borne by the taxpayers, because we're paying those stupid fines and the settlements, which the plaintiffs, people who are filing those lawsuits, clearly are entitled to. It's just that the actual elected officials who committed the original violations or made the series of decisions that created the situation, none of them are being held accountable personally. Even though most of them, I think, are out of office now. But nevertheless, it's just a huge mess. I see somebody's complaining about the Durham report. Yes, there's a lot going on right now out there about that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it. There's several thousand other people right now probably commenting on that, but it's not a good thing to see the corruption of the federal government as bad as it is, and as bad as that report revealed it to be. The Nora, you're saying that you're not going to vote. Yeah, well, that'll show them. You'll really teach them that that's an important thing. The decision just not to vote at all is probably incredibly foolish. I would encourage you to vote, even if there's a lot of problems in the election process, which there is. And the reason for it is that for those of us who actually aren't giving up and surrendering and going into a hole or trying to run away, we're still trying to make a difference in some of these elections for all the problems and all the issues that exist out there. And the more ballots that we have to work with on our side, then it's better than handing the ballot to Antifa and letting them fill it out, or whoever the heck's filling out some of these votes, these ballots. So I'm not sure why anybody thinks that it's any kind of a protest to not vote. It's kind of it may mean something to you, but it doesn't help anybody else. Particularly, we had a couple races this last cycle where we lost by just a teeny fraction of a number of votes that I was involved in, and it would have made a big difference in stopping some of the legislation that we just saw come out of the state legislature. And the people who didn't vote helped make that happen. So that's really a problem. Question here from Jason. What has been your experience buying ammo and gun parts online? Is there any semi-automatic rifles that we can still buy here in Washington? I have to tell you, I don't buy a lot of ammo or gun parts online. I just haven't, and I haven't recently. I haven't done it since the law has been changed. So I don't have any personal experience with that. I hear rumors and stories going out there, so I'm not sure really what's going on exactly. But and the question about, is there any semi-automatic rifles that we can still buy here in Washington? And I'm not sure for sure. I actually don't have the answer to that. I'll have to double check on that because there's so many rumors and stories that have gone on out there. And what I typically find is that you really want to go to one of the more clear-headed people that actually bothered to be engaged and involved in pushing back on this law, that's familiar with how it was written, that knows the way it's actually being interpreted, or at least initially right now. I don't see these laws, particularly the semi-automatic firearm restriction and the gun bag, the high cap mag ban, which came out last year. I don't see those things lasting very long. I think they're going to be thrown out. They're thrown out in other states, and I imagine they will be here too. And so we really want to take a focus, though, and not forget anybody who voted for them, because anybody who voted for those should be removed from office. But you're going to have to come up with a plan that actually involves recruiting people that are sane, that have the ability to campaign, that know what they're doing, that live in that district, that have some connection to it, not just jumping in, parachuting in from out of the blue. The left gets away with that. For those of us who care about freedom and liberty, we're not going to get away with that approach. We need to have people who are tied into the community to run for office, and they have to be serious candidates. And there's still no guarantees, but it does help. Somebody there's asking if I'm on Facebook. I think that you're asking me. This is Jennifer. Yes, I am. I don't do a lot on my Facebook page. They do so much shadow banning on Facebook that it's not quite the same as what it used to be. But anyway, I am there if you want to see the comments there. I usually just post a lot of my videos and sometimes other videos that I find that are interesting and make some comments there about local issues. I have too many, the Kingdom Bleachers saying I have too many conservative friends that don't vote. Yeah, I do too. And I mean, they're the ones that don't vote. They're the ones that are definitely helping cause the problems that we're experiencing right now. Charles, you're talking about Idaho. Listen, I got a lot of friends that are in Idaho. The challenge that Idaho has is that I don't think it has even 5 years, not with the elected officials they have there right now. Sure, they have Republicans. If you think that just because somebody calls himself a Republican, that makes any difference to your freedom and liberty, then I'm sorry, and I'm going to pop your bubble here, but it doesn't. You have to really understand what you believe and why you believe it. Unfortunately, I think a lot of the Idaho politicians that call themselves Republicans, were they to locate in Seattle, right, they would just suddenly call themselves Democrats. It's a quest for power, and they're in office. Not all of them. I know that's doesn't apply to all of them. Doesn't apply to all of them in Washington either. But the problem is that the Idaho Republicans that exist there have no idea the situation that they're facing, and that there's a lot more conservatives who live in Washington state than all of Idaho combined. And what happens is if you fall asleep at the switch, which they're asleep right now, you're going to lose your freedom and liberty just overnight. I mean, it's going to happen a lot faster than they realize. And it's happening fast because of apathy mostly. And then you get a group of people that run away and they think, oh, I'm going to go to the new state. Each state falls like a domino effect. You have to pick a state and fight. Washington's a good one to do that in. And we want Idaho to remain free and to not lose its spine. It's just like Montana, just like all these other states. But if you don't have a serious fight, you're just not going to make it. And Idaho's not going to make it very long, just judging from the approach that they're taking. Oddly enough, I mean, Florida is one of the few states that seems to be doing a major push towards a freedom and liberty oriented outcome. And they were a purple state not that long ago, and so they've rapidly become a red state, not just because of people moving there, but because of a trend change that I think could happen in Washington too. But it does require people to. We can't have morons running the political process. We have to have serious people running for office who know what they're doing and they take it seriously. It's a lot of work. You got to really get out there and do a lot of work. There's a question up here about Nora saying you can supposedly track your vote. You can. What you can't do is be sure that the ballot that they got is your ballot or that it's being counted the way you filled it out. There's no way to check that, which is ridiculous, but there is a way they can do that, but they don't want to, of course. Voter ID, Nora, you said that we need voter ID. Totally agree with you. We absolutely do. I wouldn't disagree with that at all. And the mail-in voting is a disaster for a lot of reasons. However, the disaster of mail-in voting doesn't mean that you stop voting. Still keep voting while we try to get this fixed. It's a nightmare for people who decide to give up. And by the way, half the people that are usually commenting, maybe not on this thread, but on a lot of these social media threads who say don't vote or I don't vote, they're leftists just trolling everybody else. And they try to build up this movement of not voting. And they think it is funny. It's kind of brilliant, really, convincing a bunch of people to be apathetic when they shouldn't be. And again, I'm sorry, TZ, there about the streamed reboot. Definitely a problem. That's my fault on my side. We were trying a new camera set up here that I actually prefer, but until we get into the new studio, I think I'm gonna have to stick with this kind of old school laptop approach here. So hopefully it'll work for you. Charles, I like being a thorn in the side as well. I'm not planning on leaving. Was making a joke regarding your comment about hiding in a hole. That's pretty good. Jonathan, I like your idea about flipping King County with intelligent guerrilla marketing. Listen, I would focus on Pierce and Snohomish quite a bit as well. There's a lot of work that needs to be done there, especially in Snohomish, where I think there's a lot of particular ground that can be made up. But it does take a lot of people on the ground, a lot of work that needs to be done. And it's more than just mail in the ballots. There's a lot of other extra effort that should be put into that. And you have to lay the ground in advance. Let's see. Sydney's asking a question here about you met Semi Bird. Yep, he's a good guy. I donated his political campaign. Any thoughts on him? And yeah, I think Semi's a good guy. Semi Bird, I love his military background. I like his kind of down to earth, how he grew up. That's a good background. Last I checked on the Public Disclosure Commission, he's raised about $50,000. And one of the challenges that Semi is probably going to have is, first of all, name recognition. It takes a lot to get your name out there. It just takes a lot. It's just going to be, it's people who especially he's in a school board. He's been elected to a school board, which is good, but it takes a lot of time to get your name out there. And a lot of money. There's no way. It's marketing. You're trying to market something, and it's not as easy as people think. I don't know why they think it's easy, but it just isn't. It takes an incredible amount of time. You really have to go out and he's been traveling around. Semi's been meeting a lot of, you're preaching to the choir, right? Most of the groups he's meeting with, and that's good. You have to do that. You need volunteers, you need people to support you, you need people to donate to your campaign. That's important. But it is early days. This is a marathon, not a sprint. So there's a lot of work to be done. Semi's a great guy. I have no problem with Semi. There's a couple other people that I think are probably running. There's at least one other Republican who's probably going to have some money in the race who's already filed. So we'll see how it goes. Jason Fisher, you're asking, how long do I think Boise turns into Denver? I was there in 2019 and I saw California license plates and track houses everywhere. Well, Boise's already Denver. Just look at how they vote already. And the Boise's trying to build itself up, so it's going to be like Portland is to Oregon or Seattle is to Washington. It's happening right now, and so I think that some of the people that have moved to Idaho thinking that they've landed in a place that's more free, I think it is temporarily, but they're going to rapidly lose that freedom just because of, I think, the unwillingness to play offense and the perpetual defensive approach to politics that people take when they are just trying to run away. I mean, keep in mind when you leave a place where maybe you've lived your whole life, you have an amazing network of people, most likely people who you went to high school with, people who you grew up with, your extended family, their family, a lot of in-laws, people you worked with, all just a big network of people. And especially if you're a socially active person in some way, you have a big network of people with a lot of history, and hopefully you've been a good person and there's a lot of trust there. What happens is you're able to actually mobilize a lot more people to help you or to fall back on when times are tough, when you're in that area. Now you're going to move, you're going to flee, you're going to land in Texas or Nebraska or someplace, and nobody there knows you. All they know you is you're probably the lib that left Washington State, and it's going to take you years to gain trust again, and a decade or so to gain whatever network that you probably had that you've left behind. These are just practical things you have to look through if you're planning on leaving. So I would make sure that, I think there's a lot of value to be gained by just fighting and pushing back. So anyway, there's some work that needs to be done there, and that's happened. Nora, thank you. I've never not voted. Thank you very much. Then there's a question here from Cristiano. Can cities pass their own policies on drug possession like Lakewood is trying to pass? Sure, they can. Lakewood has, I think, there were some others. Was it Everett and Bellingham? Shockingly, Bellingham. I couldn't believe that. But yeah, there's a number of different approaches you can take that can deal with it. Now, theoretically, we're in the special session right now in Olympia, and they're in a rush to shorten it. So they're trying to get this done really quick. And supposedly they're going to have a fix for the Blake decision, a fix, put that in quotes. I don't know if they'll really fix it, but that's what they're trying to do. If we all show up at voting locations to place our votes in person, this is a question from Joe. If we all show up at voting locations to place our votes in person with voter ID, will that overwhelm those voting locations? Well, right now we don't technically have voting locations. I guess you go to the auditor's office and you could turn it in there. Remember, they're not asking for your ID. They just want your ballots. And in fact, you can grab your ballot and your 10,000 closest friends' ballots and bring them all in at once and deliver it to them. And in our state, it's called ballot harvesting, and it's perfectly legal. And so that's it. I don't know about when you say overwhelming those voting locations. I remember when my grandma used to work in Renton at a polling station, it'd be busy. Sometimes you have to wait in line during voting times, but generally, if you have enough polling stations, as we've got some experience in this country for a couple hundred years, you can manage it. You simply locate them and enough of them around that you can handle the flow of people coming in, and they don't tend to be overwhelmed. Again, competency is not a high skill set for government. So I'm sure that because the auditors don't like running the idea of even polling stations, and even if you brought that back as a legal change, you'd have to do a lot of groundwork to get that to work correctly. Jason, you're asking a question, is Arizona lost or can it be turned around? Every state can be turned around. I'm really... all I can think of is people don't understand history for them to think that these places can't be turned around. Listen, I lived in New York City during the Dinkins administration before Giuliani was elected. And there's no city, maybe now Detroit and Baltimore starting to approach what New York City was like in the Dinkins administration, but it was terrible. I mean, thousands of people murdered, not hundreds. I mean, thousands of people murdered every year. The crime was just horrible. It was a disaster. And the Republican voter profile in the city was like 15%. It was nothing. And here you had this Republican governor running, didn't seem like a chance. And the guy got elected. And then I thought, well, what can he do if he gets elected? I brought him to campus, actually. I was a college Republican. I brought him to campus to come speak. And I remember thinking, could this guy really be elected? And I thought there was no chance. In fact, his campaign asked me to work for him. And I was done with the East Coast. I wanted to come home to Washington. But I watched that guy get in there and change that city like there's no city in modern American history that's had such a significant change in the crime, and therefore the profile of the city, which rippled out into all kinds of other things. And you had this explosion of an economy and a much better quality of life. And Giuliani being elected at that time probably saved 30 some odd thousand lives, just minimum of him getting in there and being elected. It's just amazing the impact that he had. No place is lost, but you can give up and surrender it if you want. If you fight for it, I believe, and if you have a rational, logical campaign to do so, you can win. You got to remember the left doesn't ever stop. It's a religion that's got under the guise of politics, and so they're never going to stop. So that's the kind of issue that I think people have to recognize. You just can't stop. Um, okay, Doug, you're asking, no answer. Okay, in-person voting. Yes, you can go and vote in person, but you're filling out your ballot in advance. You're handing it in person directly to the auditor. I do this actually myself. You can go ahead and do that. I don't think you're going to overwhelm anybody, but that's all you're doing is you're handing it in. There's no ID check. Sue, you're asking me, do you think Jim Walsh will run? I think there's a chance that Jim Walsh will run. He's probably the only elected official in the state right now with really high name recognition. Even the Shift-Wa survey they did recently showed him as being, 2 times ahead of anybody else. So, yeah, really the question of whether Jim Walsh runs is up to him, but he's the one who would make the biggest impact, most likely, as far as being able to take advantage of name recognition. The Jason Fitcher, you're asking, how crazy will things get when Washington gets rid of firearms preemption, and what cities will you see ban guns? Well, obviously, the more you impose some kind of a gun control or restrictions, on firearm possession or the ability to defend yourself, the worse it gets. It's always happened that way. The only people who deny that are college professors at Evergreen State College or some other place. They're the delusional people who can't face reality. It'd be disastrous. If you had to pick cities that would probably ban guns, I would say you look at downtown Olympia, downtown Seattle, downtown Bellingham, maybe those kind of places. And it's just a disaster. So, Jason, you have a second question related to that. What's the purpose of all these candidates jumping into the Republican primary? Well, and there is no Republican primary. Remember, we have a jungle primary in the state, which means that, and we don't have a Democrat primary, right? Democrats, Republicans, constitutionalists, anybody, you can make up whatever name you want to call it, spaceship party, whatever you want. You can all jump in. And essentially, only the 2 top vote getters in the primary are the ones that go to the general. And then it's a straight up whoever, gets 50% or 50% plus 1 or more. They're the ones that win. So there's a lot of gaming that tends to go ahead in the primary, and Republicans are not organized in the way that the Democrats punish people for running too many candidates, serious candidates in a race. The Democrats will ignore goofy crazies that jump in and say they're Democrats in a race because they don't care and they figure those people can't get the votes. So they don't mind that. But if you're a serious candidate as a Democrat, they're going to intervene. The party's going to say, we're going to pull services from you. We're going to blacklist you at Act Blue. You won't be able to raise money. That's how the Democrats play that. Republicans don't do that at all. So they basically have fratricide, right? Where they jump all in and they basically kill each other off in the primary. And then that's how 2 Democrats get through. We did that in lieutenant governor's race. We did that 10th congressional district race. And we just did it in the Secretary of State's race last year. So it's a fairly common Republican behavior. And I think one of the reasons why is that Republicans oftentimes, there's a couple of reasons why people will say they're running for office as Republicans, different than Democrats. God told them to do it, right? They had a vision. Somebody came, it was a miraculous decision that somehow they woke up and they just felt God called them to do it. I understand that feeling. People will feel that way. But it's unfortunate very few of them sit down and maybe walk through some of the practical results and think maybe what I'm really being called to do is to help somebody else get elected, not me. Secondly, people who have never been around the political process, they get elected to run. Somebody says, Glenn, why don't you run for office? Oh, somebody asked me to run. That must mean I should. And you jump in. And that is a terrible reason to run for office, especially if only 1 or 10 or 100 people ask you. If you have 250,000 people ask you to run for office, different story, maybe. But if you're just getting people to ask you to run, that happens all the time. It happens to me every day. So it doesn't make it a good idea. And so because of this, then every Republican thinks, well, I could do it or I can do it. Now, the other challenge you have with the Republican candidates is they might be very successful as a businessman or a doctor or some other skill set in their real life. And they'll decide, listen, I'm at this level in my professional life. And so therefore, that's probably the equivalent of being in Congress, or that's equivalent of being a federal senator or a governor, right? So I'll run for that position. And you don't know what you don't know. And so basically, you'll have a brutal experience when you run for campaign, you campaign for office the first time, and you have no idea what you're getting into, the useless consultants, the challenges of raising money, the difficulty of marketing, the effect of shadow banning and silencing and dishonest media, and all these other things that you're not familiar familiar with. And so it's a very brutal experience, usually the first time somebody runs for office. That usually convinces people never to go back because it's such a cesspool process. But if you get familiar with it at the lower level and you work your way up, your statistical likelihood of success is improved. But of course, most people don't have the patience to run for school board and then city council and then move their way up that way. And so that's why Republicans all jump in and then they shoot each other and they take each other out. I'm hoping that doesn't happen. It doesn't have to happen that way every time, but we've done that a lot lately. There's a question here on from TZ here. Glenn, can you get an interview with Scott Pressler to learn how to ballot harvest? I know how to ballot harvest. So, but I wouldn't mind interviewing some people that are a little bit more experienced with it. That's an interesting topic. I will probably see if I can do that. I like that idea. Jason, you're coming back. Hey, Jason, thank you for doing the @We Govern. It's easier to see your questions here. What will ever fix the whatever fix the legislature comes up with in the drug possession, will it be overturned again by the state Supreme Court? Probably not. Good question, but I don't think that'll be overturned. It's going to be kind of a watered down version, no matter what, of what existed there before, with maybe a little bit more clarity as to how you can be arrested. And the use of a drug, it's not really possession. It's more of a open drug use, willful and open drug use as a tool to get you into some kind of a forced treatment program so you can get clean. Anybody that's ever been around drug addicts and somebody's going through a drug addiction knows that they're not in the right mind. They don't make good decisions on their own. It's a terrible situation to observe. Nick, you have a question, public education ? Well, we have it. It kind of exists. It's taking a steep nosedive right now. Anybody who's been paying attention to public education, especially lately, they have this trend in public education currently. And public education has always had problems. Please, anybody that thinks there's some kind of mythic historical thing, maybe back in the 70s or 60s, there was still a merit-based approach to public education that existed. I read my father and my grandfather's textbooks, maybe from Foster High School in Tukwila, and some of the stuff that they used to do in school, and it exceeds by an order of magnitude anything I think kids do in school in those fields today. It does. But like when I was going to high school in the 80s, in Thomas Jefferson High School, with no great shakes, I had some good teachers and I had some terrible teachers. My terrible teachers did things like put a VHS tape in and then fall asleep in the back of the classroom, right? I had counselors that told me that probably destroyed the opportunity for thousands of kids to go to college. I mean, it wasn't perfect then. So you have to remember that it's really bad right now. All measurable test scores are going down, but we have to have an approach to education. And I think that one of the key approaches to fixing education, one way or the other, is have the money follow the kid. So the parents at least can have some sort of intervention there and direct their kids into either a trade school approach, if that's what fits for them, a college track approach, if that's what fits for them, and then the actual skill sets they need to get there, other types of tracks with more opportunities in education. I don't see that there's any other way to fix it. Let's see. Here's a question here. Let's see, your take on Joe, you have a question about your take on Inslee canceling mandate on Friday. Will the state have to pay up? I don't know. The state might have to pay up. I'm assuming you mean the COVID panic mandate, and I don't know. We'll have to see. It all depends on the effectiveness of people's approach to it. Inslee and Ferguson clearly are, Lisa, you mentioned this, Inslee and Ferguson clearly are soft on crime. They seem to love criminals. They'll do as much of it as they can. That's so funny. You mentioned TZ, you mentioned that your lefty friends didn't think that, they didn't understand what ESG is. That's classic. Cristiano, you had a question here about how close is our state to legalize euthanasia, prostitution, and incest. At this point in time, I don't think very close, but I don't know what that means. And if those are if somebody on the left decides that those are their highest priorities, I'm sure that those are policies that they could probably push through, at least temporarily right now. The autistic, you had a question here about, does local government help more if average people were to get elected than federal government? Yes, it clearly does. If you think about it, and I use a scenario sometimes, but if Washington, D.C. just fell into a sinkhole tomorrow and all the agencies and all the politicians and all the bureaucrats and the lobbyists just vanished from the face of the earth, you could still wake up tomorrow, go to your day job, get your kids to school, go to the baseball game, go hunting, fix the gutters in your house, you could still live a pretty regular life. Nobody'd really notice them, especially where we are 3,000 miles away. Your local government goes to heck in a handbasket, and it becomes Lord of the Flies and chaos out there on the streets. That affects your life immediately. So local government has a much bigger impact on your day-to-day life, and it's a lot easier for you to influence it and a lot easier for you to bring influence on it to make them more reasonable. Let's see. How do you feel? Okay, let's go, Brandon. How do you feel about the new digital currency we're changing to? I don't like digital currency. Let's go, Brandon. Don't like it, not planning to change to it, and I'm not changing to it, so I don't know who you're talking about. But I don't like the idea either, and there's a variety of freedom and transparency reasons why. Let's see. Jeremy Jennings, we get like 30% on average all over the state on voting turnout. That is what needs to change to make a difference for us all. Yeah, and I think 30% is not right. I think we're getting closer to 50 or 60% turnout, and it would be better if it's higher, presuming those are the people who care about liberty and freedom that they're coming out. But the other part I'd work on is there's a ton of people in the middle that actually will switch over if you reach out to them and give them a reason to. You don't do that if you're being a strange weirdo, but if you have clear freedom and liberty ideas, those are not hard ideas to sell, but you do have to be capable of selling them, and it does help. T.T. Burton, Republicans remind me of Charlie Brown and Democrats remind me of Lucy. Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's not a bad one. You're being a little nice to the Democrats, and I don't think the Republicans are as smart as Charlie Brown, but that's probably true. Renton actually, good question. TZ, you mentioned something. Renton not only has a good Democrat city councilman, they have one of them that's really good, and they have a couple more that are running this cycle that are pretty good too. Let me get down here to some questions here. Observing the Kerry Lake lawsuit in Arizona surrounding the okay, this is from TZ, surrounding the signature match. Can you explain Washington State signature matching? Good question. The signature matching in Washington State is marginal at best, and it's also, there's no way to audit it. One of the challenges you have, and it kind of makes sense, you can't just publicly put out everybody's signature, because if you did, then you'd have all kinds of other identity theft issues, especially with people using digital online signature gathering. I know there's solutions to all this. I'm just saying that if it's out there everywhere, it's an easy way for somebody to manipulate that signature and use it. So the question is, how do you, the Joe average citizen, go in and audit whether the auditor is actually doing a good job doing the signature verification? It's mostly done through a database that the state has now, as of a few years ago, as they've kind of centralized it all. But there's a lot of problems with it. One of the challenges, if you notice in the 3rd Congressional District this last cycle, and why Joe Cant had so many rehab ballot work that went on, was that the auditor down there was a problem with the database on signature matching at the Secretary of State's office. It wasn't the auditor's fault specifically, but there were policies the auditor could take. And what the auditor in Clark County decided to do is, well, if it didn't match within a certain period of time, they just pulled it over and threw it in the rehab pile, which meant you had suddenly 3,000 ballots to be rehabbed when you probably should have only had about maybe 300. And it totally changed the nature of that whole election, in my opinion. And so that's definitely a problem. And I think that in-person voting is much superior. But right now we're stuck with a stupid system that we have, and we got to find a way to get out there and make it work better. Not that it really works, but just game the system the same way the other side games it and do what we have to do. Your first name, why are we trying to reinvent the wheel? Because that's what we seem to do. People don't read history, so reinvent the wheel seems to be a pretty common approach to things. Jason Fisher, should we get prepared for the mostly peaceful protesters in 2024 to get the figurehead reelected? I don't know. I mean, the Antifa guys will come out when they're told to come out, and if they need to, that's what they'll probably do. Jason, question again, will Governor Bob Ferguson run Washington with an iron fist and go after his political opponents? I think that Ferguson probably would do that. I think Ferguson's a very dishonest and corrupt guy with a lot to hide, and I don't think he would run. I think he'd have a lot of problems. We'd have a lot of problems with him as governor. Now, my video, I'm stealing some of the thunder of my next video here, but the reality is that Franz is a much more formidable candidate, I think, and a threat to Ferguson than most people realize. And so if you look at the two kind of deep pools of support that those two Democrats have, The long knives are out, and they're going to be stabbing each other in the back for the next 12 months for sure. And it's going to be aggressive and it's going to be nasty. And Franz has a lot more connections than people, I think, seem to realize on the conservative side of the political spectrum. And she's a serious fighter. Ferguson's not a walk in the park, even though he does have a bunch of money right now. Franz can raise a lot of money too. So we don't know yet how that's going to go. It does depend on how the Republican field shapes up a little bit, but at this point in time, the Republican field's not affecting the governor's race. 18 months out, we have to see how it goes. It'll affect the primary a lot, and that's the work that has to be done between now and then. Here's a good question from Milo. With Washington being a sanctuary state and motor voter registration, is there a database to check if voters are actually a U.S. citizen? And the answer to that is no, not at all. And this is absurdly insane. I've actually tried a number of different ways to get that database, even just legitimate databases. If you remember, right, there was a story a couple of years ago where we were able to get records requests from people who would be chosen for the jury pool, and their way of getting out of the jury pool is to say, no, I'm not a U.S. citizen. And remember, the jury pool is drawn from the voter rolls. So therefore, these people were not U.S. citizens, and they were obviously on the voter rolls. So that gave you a piece of data, that gave you a data point that you could use to see, did they vote or did they as a non-U.S. citizen, because nobody's checking. And immediately what the Democrats did is they made it illegal to get that the rejection reasons for the jury pool. They eliminate that as a public record that you could get. So rather than let us have some way of auditing it. So then the second question is, how do you get the database of people who are not U.S. citizens, even those who are here legally? So people with green cards or student visas or F1 visas or some other visa. So they're here legally. They're not here illegally. They're here legally. They're working, or they're a student or something. That shouldn't be a super secret list. And it is. And I'm going to tell you, I tried to get that when the Trump administration was in office, and they refused to give it to me. So I don't want to hear it. I mean, it didn't do us any good for us to go back, and we just got no help from anybody. I would love to get that list. If suddenly somehow it lands in my lap someday, I would really like to use it to cross-reference how many non-U.S. citizens are registered to vote. And the bigger question, of course, is how many of them vote, or whether they may not even know that somebody's voting for their ballot. But I've run into people from 7 or 8 different countries here: China, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, American or people that are living in America that are citizens of another country, usually here on green cards or student visas. They've been registered to vote since I got here, mainly because of the motor voter approach. So I don't know, it's a big problem. I'd love to get that though, because we could really expose, I think, a lot with that data. Is Bob Ferguson on the Soros payroll at all? This is a question from R. Hess. That's a good question. I don't know for fact if he's aligned with the Soros wing of the Democrat Party. I do not know whether he is or not. I believe that Franz is kind of oriented more that way, but I'm taking that more from her association with FutureWise when she used to work there. So I don't know that that's a fact in either case. So we'd have to go back and look at some of the PACs that have supported him. It's possible that they both are, but when they're running against each other, they're going to have to make a decision. So I don't know the answer to that. What are your favorite news sources for truth? Do you like Epoch Times? I do actually. This is a question from Jay. I do like Epoch Times. I think it's a good resource. We're really run into a strange world where we have a news deficit, in that I don't think there's very many sources of honest reporting at all. And it used to be you had some local papers that still functioned, or even local media reporting of some kind, and that has just been wiped out. So there's not a lot of reporting. I think for Washington State, if you look at Center Square, I think they do a pretty good job collating data, articles, and putting that out. I like some of the talk show hosts that we have in Seattle. Ari and Jason are both pretty good talk show hosts, younger guys that are in the afternoon. They're on the same time, different stations, but they both do a lot of public records requests and report on original source data, and they get whistleblowers. And that makes that interesting. John Carlson does that sometimes too. Curley will do the same thing, right, if they get him. But it really just depends on whether that happens to be a topic that they're focused on getting information on or not, or whether it happens to come to you. There's not a lot, and you can't trust anything that the traditional media now has, because they're essentially just getting their marching orders. And to be fair to them too, their budgets have collapsed. They don't have that much staff anymore, and many of them are going bankrupt or close to it pretty soon. So anyway, that's one of the things. Here's a question, Pat Caldwell. Do you foresee Washington taking a large amount of illegals with the recent boondoggle southern border, since Washington is a sanctuary state? Maybe. I just think there's a lot of other states that they're going to, and for some reason we aren't one of the primary ones. I guess it's a good thing being as far north as we are and as where we're located, but for whatever reason, we get plenty of illegals. We just don't seem to be the main focus. Which sort of answers your Cat Smith, your question next. I'm skipping down. Jason, you got a question here, is if you could sit down and question Bob Ferguson, what would you ask him? Well, I don't know what he'd answer. I mean, well, I do know he just lied, but one of the questions I'd like to know is why how he justifies taking some of his biggest donors, who are attorneys, no surprise, and law firms that he donate a lot to his campaign. And then in turn, how is it ethical that he can hire them as his assistant counsel, or hire them as these temporary AG attorneys, which he does a lot of. And I'd like him to kind of explain that a little bit more. I'd like him to explain his black book and who's in it, but I don't think he would. Rez, you got a question here. What are your thoughts on King County Regional Homeless Authority Committee to Chair Shawnee Colston defending the recent nomination of a sex offender to their board? Yeah, she's crazy, and the King County Regional Homeless Authority is a disaster. It's basically just a grant grifting corruption enterprise designed to squander a lot of your taxpayer dollars and ensure that nobody actually solves the homeless problem. It's really not about solving the homeless problem for any of these big cities or counties, because there's more money into perpetuating the problem. So they're not going to solve it. None of them will. All the groups that are involved are grant grifting operations. If they take money from these places, they almost have to follow the walking topics, or what they're required to say. So it's just a disaster. Here's another question from Meg. Other than Tim, why hasn't anyone gone after ST3 with so much wasteful spending? Why is talking about implementing public transportation correctly in the state and Seattle such a taboo subject? I don't think it's a taboo subject, but if you're on the grift and you're talking billions of dollars there, a lot of people are in on that grift. That's a lot of cash. You're paying for a lot of people there. And a lot of cons and games are being run to squander those resources. It takes a lot of work to waste the kind of taxpayer dollars that they're wasting with SC3, Sound Transit 3. So when you say that it's taboo, it's not so much taboo for people like you and I. We can criticize it all we want. They just don't care. They got their money, and they're going to squander and waste it for now. The problem that's happened is I think you've had a lot of other new boondoggles, like the homeless industrial complex and all, election issues and other things that have really become a problem. And that sort of distracts from the ST3 classic boondoggle and con game that goes on there. Can we do a petition to force True the Vote? This is from Boone. Yes, you can. Initiative would be what it is. And an initiative to the legislature or the people. There's two different ways to do it. Longer conversation. I can get into that. Maybe my next live stream. I'm just looking at my time here. Maybe my next live stream, I can talk about that. And the only thing I have that's holding me up is I'm supposed to be doing a conference call with some voter integrity folk in our state right now, or in about 20 minutes. So let's see. Is it Menlo? Okay, it's a great question. Mito, is it possible to do a hybrid style of voting or switch back? Yes, of course it is. And in fact, some of these federal lawsuits, more in these other states, if they rule that mail-in voting is illegal, it's going to be a pretty big shock to the system out here. And but it is very possible to do a hybrid style of voting. We did that in this state for a number of years. And in fact, a lot of people don't know this, but Pierce County was the last county that held on to voting machines and in-person voting. And it wasn't until 2011 the state made that illegal. So switching back to that, probably that's the most realistic process, is that you would have like this hybrid approach where you would be reintroducing mail or in-person voting as well as mail-in voting, and then you'd phase it out. That's probably what you would see there. Let's see. let's see. Here's a question. Jim, you asked a question about, have you talked about surety bonds and claiming against politicians for personal injury? Do the mayor, Dow, or others have surety bonds? Business owners are being affected. Jim, I haven't talked about that lately. The surety bond story, by the way, is something that comes up every 5 years or so, give or take. It comes up all the time. They oftentimes do have bonds that are taken out for elected officials, but generally, this is put in the context of things that they did. It's like not errors and omissions, but it's like an insurance policy, like that they have at the city or the jurisdiction that covers litigation that happens, and they usually name the politicians. But in order to have anybody ever run for elected office, considering the fiascos that the political class always imposes, they have to have some kind of insurance that covers their terrible and bad decisions, which are common. So the surety bonds aren't such a big player in that. The insurance policy that, and including like a D&O insurance, would be like a directors and officer insurance that covers most of these things. It's just that taxpayers, either through an insurance payout that the taxpayers end up having to pay higher rates for, or a direct payout that the taxpayers are paying. That's typically how it goes. There's very little personal fines that really are significant that impact individuals. The exception being the Open Public Meetings Act, which is relatively minor fines. TZ, you're asking a question here. Glenn, what grade would you give Caleb Heimlich running the Washington State GOP? That is a hard job, and I need to couch this answer. I generally think Caleb's doing a good job if you understand what that job is and what it isn't. Most people who care about freedom and liberty, for some reason, think that it's a wise idea to outsource your freedom and liberty to a political party, and then presume that that party is going to properly fulfill the role of protecting freedom and liberty, which they won't. A political party of either kind actually exists to perpetuate itself, and there's things they do well. And so the left discovered decades ago that the Democrat Party won't promote the leftist agenda that they wanted. And so that's why the Democrat Party in Washington State, like in most states, is actually pretty weak and fairly useless by itself. If you don't believe me, just go to attend some of their meetings. They're very unserious, and they're filled with unserious people doing unserious things. And you wonder how the heck can this clown show actually do anything? Well, what happens is most of the actual action that goes on is done by these outside leftist groups. The campaigning, the marketing, the policy development, the promotion, the stabbing, the politicians, keeping them on the straight and narrow. None of that's really done by the party. It's mostly done by these outside leftist groups, which is always frightening because that's a lot less transparent than what happens at the party, and you don't really know what's happening. And so the Republicans aren't so much in power, so you don't see it so much when you go to Republican meetings. But it's the same problem. Parties just aren't good at solving the problems that we have if you care about liberty and freedom. So you're better to have continuity where you create organizations outside that you might keep in touch with the party and work with them. If they're the ones who care about liberty and freedom, you'll work with them to help get candidates through, but you have to work outside of the party in addition to being kind of involved in it. So it's one of these things. If you get rid of Caleb Heimlich tomorrow because you don't think he's conservative enough, then I find it highly unlikely you're going to, put somebody else in it that's going to suddenly do a much better job. There's a ways of measuring and provide metrics for success of a party, and it's very hard to do it well. It's not a job I would want to try to do, but anyway, it's. I get along with Caleb. I've been around a couple other party chairs. There have been some in the past that were a lot worse. We've actually tended to get better chairs now over the last few years. Anybody remember Luke Esser or Chris Vance? I mean, that was an era of probably some of the worst human beings we could ever put in charge of the political party. Let's see. Question: what happened to the florist that thug Ferguson went after? She had to pay a big price. The florist in the Tri-Cities, that was a ridiculous lawsuit, and Ferguson should be held to account for that at some point in time. I really, really believe that. Jason, you're asking a question: how did Sideshow Bob get his nickname? Was it from Todd Herman? The answer is yes. Todd Herman actually gave him that nickname. It was a great nickname. Red Mike Do you have opinions on Tacoma? I do. I live south of Tacoma myself. I drive through there all the time. I actually like Tacoma. Um, it smells a lot better than it did when I was a kid. It's had some of these waves of development there that have really improved Tacoma in a lot of ways. And when I was in college, I remember one summer I had a job delivering home healthcare oxygen to homes up in the Tacoma Hilltop area, and it was bad back then. That was early '90s. It was not a good place to be, and it was tough. And when I drive up into some of those same neighborhoods, I've seen improvement that's pretty substantial. So. Then here's a question, Milo, puzzling that our voter rolls seem not to be as clean as they should be. Well, don't puzzle about it. It's absolutely true. They aren't. And it is they being the auditors, county auditors, and the state secretary of state, and the Democrats in particular, are terrified of our cleaning up the voter rolls. I think people think that a lawsuit's going to be what changes somebody's mind if they're in government. It doesn't. All your stupid lawsuits, you could file a million of them. It's not going to do any good. But they really don't like us cleaning up the voter rolls. Holy cow! Their response to that is so disproportionate to the impact that we're having that clearly we're on the right track trying to do that. Kraken, you're asking, can we get laws repealed that are unconstitutional? Of course, U.S. and Washington. Yes, we can. Of course. Let's see. There's a question there about, I think he's doing the best that he can. I'm assuming you're talking about Caleb up there, and I believe that's true. I think he is. That is a tough job, guys. You wanted to run the party, yeah, go for it. But it is not an easy job. It takes a lot of work, and you are only going to get grief. You rarely get any credit. I think that's how it tends to be. It is an issue for you. Let's see, Kraken, how come Washington voters don't get to vote on all of these laws, bills, et cetera, that are unconstitutional? Because they're voted on by your elected officials. Your elected officials are who you vote for, and that's what they pass. That's how it works. Let's see, what steps would you take to make that possible? I don't know what you're referring to there if you're talking about voting on the laws. I mean, you can always do a referendum, but I find that to be a difficult thing and one you can rarely use well. There might be a referendum this year, but these things are not easy. You're asking right here, Red Neck, do you actually know the whole process and steps to vote on the law, like using a referendum? I do, but there's several things that are involved in that. Let's see. Let me look down here. Jennifer, I'm not sure. That's a comment there, so I'm not sure I can answer that right now. Kraken, here's a question. Can we sue the government as private citizens? Sure, you can. People do it all the time. Doesn't mean you're going to win. Anybody can sue. Doesn't mean you can prevail. TZ Burton, how do you feel about the panel discussion with podcasters like Brandy Cruz, William Kirk of Washington Gun Law, and Sean Reynolds of News for Reasonable People? I like them. I've chatted with Brandy over the years. I'm not sure that I know Sean Reynolds and William Kirk. I'm not sure I know them well. But anybody who's willing to get up there and just be a reasonable person talking about these things, especially local issues, it's very good. Jason, is Vancouver, Washington turning to Portland? Well, I'm sure Portland wants that to happen. And that seems to be what the Democrats' goal is. But I wouldn't say Vancouver's gone that far yet. And they don't have to. So anyway, I think that there's a lot of work that can be done there. Guys, with that, I'm going to basically be wrapping it up here. I've got another Zoom call. I really want to apologize for those of you if you jumped on later on and you missed our little technical problem in the beginning. That did delay this live stream. So I hope that it's kind of why I went a little bit longer here right now. So I'm sorry for that, and I hope that that didn't cause too much trouble for you. We will try to have that fixed next week, presuming that we do this next week, which there's a lot of feedback here. So I imagine that I'll do that next Tuesday. Hopefully I will see you then. Again, watch for a couple videos I have coming up this week, and I hope I did an okay job answering your questions. There's a few questions you guys have asked here that I want to try to go back and do a little more research on. Hopefully I do a better job answering them if you bring them up next time. Until then, I just want to wish everybody well. Don't give up on freedom and liberty. Don't give up on Washington State. It's not going to be easy, but I wouldn't want to live anyplace else. So hope all's going to go well for the rest of you guys, and on to some more work. So thank you guys so much. And I appreciate the time that you're giving me and all the questions that you asked.